Centuries ago, Brahmin scholars in India faced an existential crisis. The rival Muslim faction had consolidated absolute control over the region's medical texts, leaving the traditional practitioners with nothing but empty shelves. The ruling physicians refused to train anyone outside their own community. As illnesses spread through the villages, the traditional scholars watched helplessly as people died for lack of a science they were no longer allowed to study. Driven by this mounting pressure, a group of senior scholars gathered in a riverside hall to plot a course of action. They lacked the political and military strength to seize the texts. Their only option was to recover the knowledge from the inside. They needed a spy to infiltrate the rival school. The survival of their entire medical lineage now rested on a mission of high-stakes intellectual espionage. The council turned to Vagbhatacharya. Only 20 years old, his mastery of the Vedas was so complete that he was the only candidate with the mental capacity to absorb a foreign medical system at high speed. Vagbhata accepted the mission. He agreed to cross the river and infiltrate the home of the most famous and wealthy physician of the opposing faction. He spent weeks erasing his own identity. He adopted the dress, the language, and the daily prayers of his rivals, preparing to live a total lie. After performing his final Brahmin rites, he slipped into the mist of the river at dawn, leaving his world behind. He traded his sacred standing and his entire history for a single uncertain chance to save his culture's medicine. When Vagbhata arrived, the master physician was immediately skeptical. He put the young applicant through a rigorous examination of his intellect and background. Vagbhata's performance was so flawless that the master was stunned. He immediately accepted the young man as his premier student, providing him with housing and meals. To completely maintain his strict secret dietary laws, Vagbhata invented a story about local relatives who expected him for dinner. This allowed him to avoid the guru's table and protect his cover. Inside the estate, Vagbhata moved at an impossible pace, memorizing centuries of advanced medical research and surgical techniques within months. Blinded by his brilliant students' dedication, the master began inviting Vagbhata to his private 7-story tower for late-night sessions, sharing the most guarded oral secrets of his craft. The man Vagbhata was actively robbing had become his greatest benefactor, driving the mission toward a dangerous, inevitable climax. During one of these late-night sessions, the guru lay down on his bed and asked Vagbhata to massage his legs. As he worked, the weight of his deception finally hit him. He was a master scholar who was performing menial, physical labor for a man his people saw as an oppressor. The grief of his situation became entirely physical. A single, heavy tear escaped his eye and splashed directly against the guru's bare skin. The guru woke instantly. He looked at his student's face, realized he had been deceived, and drew his sword to execute the intruder. Trapped at the top of the 7-story tower, Vagbhata ran for the window and threw himself into the dark. Plummeting toward the ground, he shouted, "If the Vedas, Shastras, and God are true, let me absolutely not be harmed." He hit the ground, survived with only a slight limp, and escaped across the river back to his own people. He had survived the physical fall, but the exact phrasing of that split-second prayer was about to destroy his life. Vagbhata returned to the Brahmin council as a hero, possessing the entirety of the stolen medical knowledge. But the elders did not celebrate. They interrogated every detail of his escape, eventually focusing entirely on the words of his mid-air prayer. The council fixated on the word if. By saying if the texts are true, rather than because the texts are true, they argued he had expressed a fundamental doubt in their scripture. It implied a conditional truth, not an absolute one. For this single word of doubt, the council declared him a Brahman, an outcast. They excommunicated him and banished him from their society immediately. The man who risked his life and sacrificed his dignity to save his culture was cast out by that same culture over a point of grammar. In exile, Vagbhata realized if he abandoned his work now, his entire sacrifice would be erased. He spent his years in isolation distilling the chaotic medical knowledge he had stolen into a single structured volume, the Ashtanga Sangraham. To make the knowledge indestructible, he rewrote it into the Ashtanga Hridaya. He converted every medical fact into poetic meter, creating a rhythmic masterpiece that anyone could perfectly memorize. He delivered the texts to the council that banished him, then vanished into history. This history is still visible today. In Kerala, traditional Ayurvedic scholars are strictly forbidden from studying these specific texts on Ekadashi, the 11th lunar day. This rule exists as a permanent mark of ritual impurity. It is a historical scar, a reminder that their most vital medical science was written by a man they had officially discarded. Scientific truth eventually outlives the prejudices of those who try to gatekeep it. Vagbhata achieved a singular victory. He made his society's medical survival permanently dependent on the man they threw away.